Okay, let's dive right into this explainer because we are about to completely reframe how we view the modern penal system. When you think of justice today, I bet the very first image that pops into your head is a prison cell. It just seems so permanent, right? Almost like an unchangeable law of nature. But here is the crazy truth. The very concept of the prison system as we know it today is actually a surprisingly recent invention in the grand scheme of human history. So today we're going to trace that whole fascinating evolution literally from ancient villages all the way up to the modern cell block.
So picture this, a world without a single prison cell. Literally no giant concrete walls, no barbed wire, no long-term holding facilities whatsoever. It's kind of wild to think about, but we really have to ask ourselves, how exactly did ancient societies handle rule breakers? Because criminals for sure existed back then. So what did society actually do when they couldn't just lock offenders away out of sight?
Well, that brings us to Section 1, A World Without Prisons, Ancient Justice.
Ancient justice was incredibly different from what we're used to. If someone stole a bag of grain or attacked a neighbor or broke any local law, the community's response was fast, it was highly visible to the rest of the village, and honestly, it was often pretty brutal. Because there were absolutely no long-term holding cells to quietly put someone away in, the community just dealt with the problem right then and there, completely out in the open.
You'll notice a total lack of a jail time option here. The choices were basically physical, financial, or social. If you broke the rules, you might be looking at a public beating right in the town square. Or you were forced to cough up a heavy fine, handing over your hard-earned coins to make things right. And if the crime was bad enough, you were just exiled. They literally kicked you out of the village to fend for yourself in the wilderness.
The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that putting a human being inside a cage as the final punishment just wasn't on the menu yet. The idea of feeding, housing, and guarding a person for years on end, that would have sounded completely absurd and, frankly, way too expensive to ancient villagers. The empty jail cell, as a concept, practically didn't exist.
Which brings us to Section 2, the King's Dilemma, a growing problem. As those tiny villages started growing into massive, sprawling kingdoms, that fast, brutal system started falling apart. Kings and rulers suddenly found themselves stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, immediate execution for every single minor or moderate crime is just way too extreme. You literally can't execute every petty thief. But on the other hand, you can't just let dangerous people freely walk the streets. That terrified the public and unrest was brewing. Rulers desperately needed a way to manage this without going to either extreme.
And that led to a massive aha moment in history. Leaders realized they needed a structural middle ground, which led to the construction of the very first early prisons. But, and this is a huge but, they were created just to hold people, not to punish them. That distinction is everything, and it completely changes how we should look at these historical structures.
Moving right along to Section 3, Dungeons as Waiting Rooms, Temporary Holds.
This era reveals what I think is easily the biggest plot twist in the history of the justice system. Today, we view prison as the punishment itself. A judge literally says, "You are sentenced to 5 years." But the ancient and medieval view was entirely different. Those massive stone castles, they did not use their dungeons for 10-year sentences. Those early prisons were literally just temporary holding areas.
So, you're probably wondering, what exactly were these people waiting for? Mostly, they were just tossed behind bars to make sure they didn't run away. They might be waiting for tomorrow's trial to start, or waiting for a judge to decide what their actual physical punishment was going to be. Or, and this was super common, they were just sitting there until their family could finally scrape together enough coins to pay off their fine. Once the trial was over, or the fine was paid, their time in that waiting room was done. Now, a quick reality check. Just because we're calling them temporary waiting rooms doesn't mean they were pleasant. To be completely clear, these spaces were absolute nightmares. Historical accounts show they were terrifying, pitch black, severely overcrowded dungeons. You absolutely did not want to be stuck in one of these places while waiting for your fate.
And the mindset of the guards running these places was purely transactional. They could not have cared less about making the prisoners better people. There is zero concept of rehabilitation. The main, and honestly only, purpose was control. Keep them locked up, make sure they don't escape before the trial, that's it.
Okay, let's look at Section 4, the Era of Reform, a major shift.
This is the period that changes absolutely everything about how society views human nature. In the 1600s, we were still squarely stuck in the era of control and medieval dungeons. But then,
right around the 1700s and into the 1800s, this huge intellectual revolution happens. Philosophers start thinking about punishment in a completely new way, and that leads directly to the birth of the modern prison system.
This simple quote really hits the nail on the head. For the very first time on a massive scale, society started believing that a criminal's nature wasn't permanently fixed. They started thinking, hey, instead of just hurting this person or kicking them out of the village forever, maybe they can actually be transformed. Maybe they can be repaired.
To pull off that kind of transformation, reformers invented an entirely new methodology based on 3 core pillars. First, isolation, physically separating the person from society and bad influences. Second, discipline, giving them strict, completely unwavering daily routines. And third, reflection, literally forcing them to sit in silence and think deeply about what they did. The theory was that these 3 things combined would actually reform a human soul.
Because of this new philosophy, the entire system just flipped. Instead of the old way, a quick public beating, judges started handing down a totally new kind of sentence. Criminals were now kept for months, sometimes years. The isolation, the strict routine, and just the sheer passage of time locked inside a facility literally became the punishment. The temporary waiting room had officially become the final destination.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final kind of provocative thought. We've just seen that the modern idea of a prison, locking someone in a cell for years as their primary punishment, is basically a recent societal experiment born out of the 1700s and 1800s. It hasn't been around forever. So if our current system is really just one recent step in a very long historical evolution, how do you think societies of the future will look back on us? Will they see our modern prisons as the ultimate solution, or just another awkward stepping stone towards something else entirely? Think about that, keep questioning the world around you, and I will catch you in the next explainer.